Hi guys, this is J.Anthony. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'd like to start a new segment for my channel. It would be your watch questions. I'd like to take some time to address some of the questions I get asked in the comment sections and provide answers to them. So unfortunately I haven't done a great job of answering all your questions. I get asked questions on all my videos and I try to answer the ones as I can. However, I haven't been able to address them all, and unfortunately not all the questions get answered in time. So I have been paying attention. I try to read all your comments. Unfortunately, I don't always get the opportunity. However, I do know that there's a lot of people out there with good questions about watches, and I'd be more than happy to give you the answers. And I think one of the good ways I can do is about starting to address this is I'm seeing some common questions. So I'm going to go ahead and start this new blog series. And basically what I'll do is I've already called out and looked through some of my comments and taken some common questions that I get, and I'll address them in this little kind of blog response. And then if you could do me a favor of leaving some more questions on this blog, and if I notice them on my other videos, I'll take those as well. I'll keep this as a continuing series, and then whatever questions you guys have about watches, I'll respond to them in my next watch blog response. So again, if this is something you like, please let me know in the comments, and feel free to leave any questions that you have about watches, and I'll get to them on my next blog. So I have a couple questions for this blog, and again, these are ones that have been left on my videos. And these are ones I tend to see quite a bit, so I figured we'd start off with these first. So one of the first questions I got asked by a viewer was, in relation to my video of quartz versus mechanical versus automatic, which of those three tends to be the most reliable and which one tends to last the longest? And this question isn't exactly a black and white response, but the way I'd like to think of it is this, is that quartz watches are going to be the most reliable in terms of accuracy. That's just the way they are. However, durability-wise, they have a finite lifespan on them. You know, they're a computer, a circuit board, and a battery. And over time, you've seen this before, I'm sure, batteries can leak acid and they can fry the circuit board, or circuit boards can go bad. When you buy a quartz watch, the expectation is, you know, it's going to have to be replaced at some point. And when it needs to be replaced, it's the entire movement's going to have failed. So, you know, you might get 10 years out of a watch, 20 years, 30 years. I've seen quartz watches go 40 or 50 years even. But at some point, they're going to require a major overhaul, and that's just kind of something that you need to expect with a quartz watch. In relation to mechanical and automatic, traditionally mechanical watches tend to be the most robust since they have fewer moving parts than an automatic. Automatic watches, you have that rotor spinning around. They can knock dust on other things around the movement. But the truth of the matter is that mechanical and automatic movements, while they're going to be less accurate overall than a quartz watch, if they're properly serviced and maintained, they can basically go on forever. Because again, they're mechanical in nature. They're not one solid piece. They have parts that can be replaced and they can be serviced. And you know, I have an 1899 pocket watch on my channel you can check out. And again, that watch is at this point in time 116 years old, and it runs beautifully when it's been serviced. However, again, it still runs beautifully. I may be wrong, but I would be stunned if a quartz watch is still around in 116 years. So that's kind of my overall response. It's going to depend a lot on the brand of the watch that you're referring to. There's different qualities of quartz movements, different qualities of mechanical movements, different qualities of automatic movements. And also there's just going to be the cost associated with it as well. You know, someone's going to be more likely to take good care of a Patek Philippe or an Audemars Piguet or even a Rolex, for example, since they're expensive to buy and they have some intrinsic value to them, than say a $50 mechanical watch they bought or a $10 quartz watch that they bought. So that's something else you got to kind of take into equation. And on that front too, a lot of people ask, who makes the best watches? Is it the Swiss? Is it the Japanese? Is it the Germans? And beyond those three, those are the big three, but there's quite a few other countries that make them. Russia's famous for some of their watches like Peugeot, and there's some American watches out there, although like Hamilton and some of the traditional ones have been bought out by Swiss companies. I reviewed a Shinola on one of my channels, which is made in Detroit, Michigan, but it uses Swiss parts, so that's sort of an American watch. You can kind of look at that different ways. And there isn't a really great answer to that too. And the reason that I say that is I'm a very logical person, and to me this is a question that's more answered emotionally. So I look at facts and figures when I come up with these answers. So I have no doubt people have emotional responses to this question, and there are people that are diehard Swiss watch fans or diehard Japanese watch fans or diehard German fans. And the reality is if you believe that one is intrinsically better than the other, you can spend the day coming up with a great argument as to why one is way better than the other. Personally, I look at them the same way I look at my cars, and that or any other good even for that matter, that there's high quality and low quality from any country of origin. Certain countries are known for certain things. To me, Japanese, in terms of reliability and simplicity, I personally think that they're the best on that front. And again, that's not saying the best watch overall, but in terms of reliability and simplicity, Japanese watches, much like their cars, tend to take the simplest approach to their mechanisms. They tend to be a lot less complex, and when you have less complexity, there's less things to go wrong. If you're really into the watchmaking art, though, and traditional watchmaking, in terms of things that are, highly complex and very detailed, you may not be turned on by a lot of Japanese watches. Grand Seikos and a couple other Japanese watches actually do have a really high level of skill involved in their manufacture. But you're not going to find the detail you'd find in, say, an Anglong Son from Germany, where there's beautiful hand carving and all this intricacy that goes into them as well. But there's detail for the sake of detail. Typically, you're not going to find on a Japanese watch detail that doesn't add to the function. Whereas on a German watch, you're going to see detail for the sake of detail. And, again, German watches, I personally, if I was going to pick a favorite watch, I love Alongzona from Germany. I just think those watches are spectacular from the art perspective of them. Now, if I had to keep one of those on my wrist for 5 years versus a Grand Seiko on my wrist for 5 years and beat it up a little bit, which one would I think would still be running in 5 years? They may both, but I'd probably feel more comfortable that the Seiko would be okay to be bumped around more, just because, again, the Alongzona is going to be a much more fragile handmade watch. And the same thing goes with Swiss watches. I'd say Swiss watches in general are pretty reliable watches. They have their issues too. I have a post on my channel you're welcome to watch about some of the issues I've had with my Swiss watches. Rolexes are pretty reliable for the most part, but once you get into more complex watches like Patek Philippe, they have some Grand Complications. They have watches that have, ludicrous amounts of parts. I forget the last one they made, but the thing was over like an inch thick. It was so thick and full of complications. I mean, the more complexity you add to a movement, the more opportunities you're having for things to go wrong, and the more intrinsic, or the more service is going to be required on something like that. So, who makes the best watches? What are you determining is best? Is it style? That's something that is subjective. Is it build quality? The Swiss, the Germans, and the Japanese all make incredible quality watches, and there are other companies in other countries that make great quality watches. I would argue that, Chanel in Detroit makes a great quality watch, and that there's some really reliable Poljots out there. I mean, it goes on and on, so you really can't say one is really better than the other. I think that certain countries are known for certain design factors. Again, Japanese is more kind of a simple essence design, or it's mechanical simplicity, and I really appreciate that, and I think that's a very sound manufacturing ideal, and I like the engineering behind it. I think, again, from terms of reliability and craftsmanship, I think that's a great thing. So if you're into that and you like the simplicity design, then you're probably going to like Japanese better. If you like the idea of somebody hand carving all the pieces on your watch and it being kind of a work of art, then you're looking at a higher end Swiss watch or a German watch more than likely. So again, it's a very subjective thing, and there isn't really a right or wrong way to answer that question. So, tell me what you think in the comments below, and if you have an argument that has factual basis to it beyond just an emotional response, and you think there's something I left out, please feel free to share that on my channel. I'm sure there's a benefit from your insight. One of the other questions that comes up is, and the common luxury tier brand of watches, who makes the best watches? And when I say common, brands that everybody's heard of. So let's go with kind of common four that people have all heard of: Rolex, Breitling, Omega, and Tag Heuer. This is something that, again, can be seen as kind of subjective. I've owned 3 of those with the exception of Tag Heuer. I've held and taken apart all of these watches, and in my experience up until the last couple of years, I haven't had one of these with the exception of a Rolex or an Omega around me in the last couple of years. I'd say Rolex and Breitling are well, let me put it to you this way. I'd say Tag Heuer was at the bottom of my list by far. I know they've gotten a lot better at this. A lot of the old Tag Heuers that I used to take apart, they had like plastic retainer rings to hold the movements in. You take the case back off and they just looked really cheap inside, and they had base ETA movements in them. There was nothing really special about them. Breitling and Omega, up until a couple years ago, they also used ETA movements, but they actually would modify them and make them higher quality than they would have just as a basic movement. And Omega had the coaxial movement enhancement that they put on some of those pieces, which made them special. And in the last couple of years, both Breitling and Omega have kind of got on the trend of building their own in-house movements. And from what I understand, they both made some incredibly good quality pieces. And I'd say within the last couple of years, now that they've become manufacturer companies of making their own movements, I think that it's fair to say that they're on the same level of Rolex now. If you would have asked me that 6 or 7 years ago, when they were still using mostly ETA Bosch movements and Rolex was doing everything in-house, I would have said Rolex is a much better watch just from that. Now, the flip side is I would have said at that time that Rolex's cases were inferior quality. Breitling in particular has very nice quality cases. Their bracelets are like buttery smooth and they're very nice. And Omega's got pretty decent cases too. TOG, I haven't held a newer one in a couple of years, but my experience with TOGs of, I'd say, 5 years and older were not in the same league as Breitling and Omega. They were, I don't know, in some cases almost as nice as some of the lower end Rolex sport watches, but they still were a tier below. But like just as Breitling and Omega have started doing in-house movements, Rolex has addressed their issue with their bracelets. A lot of the newer Rolex clasp are a much higher quality design, and they're just much more well made than they used to be. They're solid end links, they're solid links in general. They have a much thicker clasp. It's not that cheap chintzy fold over clasp that they used to have that was just like a piece of stamped metal. So they've come a long way, and I think these days Rolex, Breitling, and Omega are very much on the same tier. There's a bunch of other watch brands out of there, and if you guys have particular questions about watch brands I haven't mentioned, I know there's a bunch. I mean, we could get into Jaeger-LeCoultre and Zenith, and Longines. There's a whole bunch of other brands, but to me, the big players are, again, Rolex, Breitling, Omega, and TOG Heuer. So if you have questions about another brand that I haven't addressed, please post it in the comments below, and I'm happy to address one of those brands as well in a future post. Well, another question I get asked a lot is, what's the best value in watches? And again, this isn't really a question that I can answer because it depends on your budget and what you're interested in. I'd say, most of my viewers aren't the kind of viewers that can afford, say, a Rolex newer used or a higher end watch, but they appreciate the fine art of watchmaking and they want to buy something that's nice quality. And there actually are some pretty good choices out there. So, I guess kind of talking value-wise, if you're talking sub $1,000, there is, you can get some really nice deals on some Oris watches, which are, I'd say, pretty equal quality. Some of the older Omegas that use ETA movements, they're nice pieces. You can find some Longines or Hamiltons that are used or new under that price. Those are pretty decent watches. Again, ETA movements, pretty good case quality. You can find some nice vintage Omegas online, like the Dynamic, which is, I think, kind of very cool kind of watch. Just some general like 70s, 80s, even some early 90s. You might get lucky and find some decent Omegas like the Constellation for under $1,000. Those are a good buy for if you want an esteemed watch brand at a decent value. For those of you that are looking something sub $300, I've mentioned some of these on my post. I think, for under $100, you can get a mechanical Invicta watch with a Japanese Seiko or Miyota movement. Those are great bang for buck. You can't go wrong with one of those. I've done sub reviews on Orient watches. I love Orient watches. You get great complications and in-house movements and great quality. And again, you can get those for a pretty good price, and you can get a tremendous watch for a little over $100, let alone under $300. Seiko makes some great watches. There's the Seiko 5 series. Those are really nice watches. And if you don't buy retail, if you go online and do a little research, you can get really good deals. One of my favorite dive watches, so I've reviewed the Orient Mako, and that's a tremendous dive watch, but it's kissing cousin through Seiko, which owns Orient, is called the Orient Monster. That's an incredible watch, and retail on those is over $500, but you can get them on eBay for a little over $200. And there's a whole bunch of other Seikos. There's the SKX series. There's the SRP series. There's the SRP series uses their 4R36 movement, which I've reviewed on my Japanese Seiko, my JDM Seiko. And that's a hacking movement. That's an incredible movement. Anything with that movement is a tremendous deal. Go on eBay, look for 4R36, and look for a watch that you like, and you'll get one at a great price. So that's going to give you all the functionality of a decent Swiss watch for, again, $100 or $200 or whatever. It's going to be a great deal. Lots of options out there. I hear from time to time people mention Sterling Original and Stour watches and ask me what I think of those. They have great style. You're getting a lot of, wrist presence for the money. They use Chinese movements. I think some of the decent ones use the Seagull movement. Seagull makes some great movements. They're an older Chinese movement company. They use some other movements in there too, and they rename them and they call them things, so they kind of cover up where they get them from. But I've heard people having different levels of quality with them. My personal experience kind of holding them and looking at the case quality, the case quality to me is inferior to, say, like a Seiko or an Orient. To me, you're paying for the styling of it, and again, they're not using a Japanese movement, they're using a Chinese movement. So if you're solely concerned with style and you don't mind a watch lasting, you know, maybe 5 years and that kind of being it, then, you know, for under $100, again, those are a great deal. And you can get those things severely discounted if you go to like a website like Shop NBC or even look on eBay. And so yeah, that's going to be kind of the end of my first little watch blog. Hopefully I've addressed some of the questions you guys found helpful. So if you can do me a favor now, if you can go ahead and tell me what you think. So is this watch blog helpful? If so, let me know in the comments below and let me know what questions you have. Again, this is my way of kind of answering your questions. So what watch questions do you guys have? And if I'm seeing consistent questions that I think I can speak to, that I think people would want to hear, then I'll include your questions on my next watch blog. So thank you again for watching. Thank you again for your support. I really appreciate all the support from the people that watch my channel as it continues to grow and I continue to find more ways to add to it. The more support I get from you guys, the more content I can put on the channel. So again, I really appreciate it. Thank you for helping me get this channel to grow. So if you could please comment and rate on this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Much appreciated, and have a good day.